Hi everyone! Today we are going to be talking about all the books I read in January. There were a total of 6 books and I read across genres. I'm not going to be spending too much time on the intro today, so let's just get right in. First book that I read was People We Meet on Vacation by Emily Henry. This was a reread for me and I was reading it before the movie came out. It used to be one of my favorite books, and as my taste has evolved, I won't say it's a favorite anymore, but I do still think it's a great rom-com. We follow Alex and Poppy, who have been best friends for years, and they have always gone on these summer vacations together, but something happened 2 years back and they are no longer friends, and Poppy contacts Alex to try and get back what they had and try one last time, essentially. I did really enjoy the movie, and I thought that they portrayed Poppy and Alex really well. I'm talking about the movie as well just because the adaptation was really the big thing of this year rather than the book. But yeah, it was a story that I knew quite well, so I wasn't rediscovering it. It was my 3rd time reading it, and I wasn't surprised by anything, and I remembered a lot more than I thought that I did, and so nothing really took me by surprise, and I was very familiar with it, and in that way it offered a sort of comfort. I knew that it was going to be a book that I would really enjoy to start the year, but it wasn't groundbreaking just because I'd read it before. I do think that Emily Henry is one of my favorite romance authors because she writes characters that feel a lot more real and a lot more relatable than some other rom-coms because they're really not perfect, and it's especially the case within People We Meet on Vacation. But despite not being perfect characters and despite not making the best decisions all of the time, you really empathize with them, and I think she's a great writer as well. So that was People We Meet on Vacation. I was in the mood to read a fantasy, and I'd heard a lot of good about The Second Death of Locke by V.L. Bovalino. I read it fairly quickly, but I felt mostly detached from the story. I kind of forgot the characters' names, so let me look them up, and that goes to show because I really tend to remember. We follow Gray and Kier in this sort of fantasy world where there are mages and hands. The hands have the power to provide magical powers to the mages. Kier is a mage and Gray is a hand, so she gives him power, but I'd heard a lot of people saying that The Yearning was really good, and I think that I had these expectations of Yearning partly because I really do enjoy that subject matter, and I loved how Yearning was portrayed in Madonna in a Fur Coat, so I had this grand idea of Yearning, and I honestly don't think it was that intense. Now, I don't know if it's because I felt a bit detached from the story overall, or if it's genuinely that it wasn't that intense, but I think I've read fantasies where the Yearning was stronger. What I will say is I really loved that we don't meet these enemies to lovers kind of tropes. Kier and Gray have known each other for a while. They're very close, and I really do like that. It was just refreshing to read a sort of dynamic where the main characters are really good friends, but then the story itself, I don't know. I didn't care for it too much. I will say what took me most by surprise was the end of the book, because when I logged it on Goodreads, I saw that it was the first one in a series, and so I was expecting a huge plot twist, and the more we were going, the more I realized it was wrapping up. So I was like, this is going to take me by surprise because I have no idea what's going to happen, and that's because it's a standalone. It's just going to be an interconnected series, but it's standalone books. So Goodreads lied to me. I felt very betrayed, but I will say that made me happier because I wasn't enamored with the story to begin with. But I also think there is more need for standalone fantasies, so I think that that was refreshing in a way. I have like mixed feelings. Part of me thought it was good, and then part of me was just a bit underwhelmed. Then I read L'Étranger by Albert Camus. It's translated to either The Outsider or The Stranger, and both titles make a lot of sense. I think The Outsider is my personal favorite title in English. A big classic in France. It's a classic to the point where it's a story that we tend to study at school. I unfortunately didn't get to do that, but in a way I'm happy I didn't, because when a book is assigned at school and you're 14, 15, there is less inclination to read it. So I'm happy that I got to read on my own time. I don't really know how to explain the plot of the story. All I really want to say is that the book opens with the sentence, and I'm going to paraphrase it because I don't know what it is in English. Today, mom died. Or maybe yesterday, I don't know. And this really introduces our main character, who reads as if he feels nothing and that he's just simply moving through life as if nothing affects him. And that is really a portrayal of Albert Camus' philosophy of the absurd. I think that despite finding the story quite compelling and despite understanding really why it's such a big piece of French literature, I wish that I had read more about Camus' philosophy before reading this. Specifically, I really want to read Le Mythe de Sisyphe. I'm going to say it's called The Myth of Sisyphus, but I don't know that it is. But that really dives into his philosophy, and that is a philosophical book. And I think if I had read that first, I would have enjoyed this one more, because I would have understood where our main character is coming from and why he's making these decisions and why he's acting the way that he is. I was really pleasantly surprised by how accessible the writing was. I had tried to read a few of Camus' works before, and I guess I was starting with more literary, more abstract texts, but in this one it felt very easy to read, and I did really enjoy that part. So it's definitely a book that I wish to reread after I dive into Camus' philosophy more. Then I read Cleopatra and Frankenstein by Coco Mellers. I had this book on my list of books to read in 2026. I've mentioned before, but I read Blue Sisters by Coco Mellers, and I didn't love Blue Sisters. It was definitely a book that I enjoyed the writing of, but I didn't enjoy the content, and I just didn't care for the stories. I felt very removed from the overall book, but I'm here to say I really did like Cleopatra and Frankenstein. I enjoyed it a lot more, and I was a lot more attached to the characters, which is where I would draw the line between why I enjoyed this one more than I did Blue Sisters. We follow Cleo, who is 24, and she meets this older man at a party called Frank. He's 40. He has his life together, and they kind of rush into a marriage together, and then things unravel little by little. But I do want to say this, we do follow these two characters, and it's largely about them too, but we do also follow other characters, and these other characters are Cleo and Frank's close friends or family. They serve the purpose of advancing Cleo and Frank's story, but we aren't always under Cleo and Frank's point of view, and I think that's important to mention because I was taken aback at first when I was reading this, and the first few characters that we started following that weren't Cleo and Frank, I had a hard time really caring what they had to say. I do think one or two POVs weren't that necessary, to be honest. A lot of them were, and some of them I just didn't think so. But I really do enjoy Coco Mellers' writing, and I look forward to reading whatever she comes out with next. I don't think she's going to be a favorite author, but I have hope that one or two of her books will become books I really love. Cleopatra and Frankenstein is definitely one that I really enjoyed and that I would recommend to friends. I just think it was a very interesting story, and I like those kinds of stories. They're usually what I gravitate towards, and stories that I tend to really enjoy. I just think the format of it was a little bit weird, and it made the pacing really slow. This book took me a long time to read, and I had the same issue with Blue Sisters, where I feel like the pacing is off sometimes, which is why I didn't adore both. I did enjoy this one more because I cared more for the story, but I still found some issues with the pacing personally. And then on a whim I decided to reread The Little Prince by Antoine de Saint-Exupéry. I think The Little Prince is one of the most beautiful and heartwarming stories. You can definitely read it in an hour or less, so if you haven't read it, I would highly recommend. It's a children's story and it's a children's book, but it has so much for adults as well, and it's a very, very endearing story, and I think that's why I love it so much, and I think that's why it's the most popular book and the most translated book after the Bible is that it resonates with a lot of people because it really focuses on things that are important to people in general and not just to specific groups of people. I have a hard time trying to explain what The Little Prince is about, so I don't think that I can confidently give a summary, but I think it's one of those books that everyone should read because it's so enjoyable and heartwarming. It makes you look inwards and it makes you refocus on what is important in life, and largely that comes from human connection, and it's even more endearing to see that through the lens of a child because they have, in a way, I guess, a better outlook on life and a better outlook on what is important and what matters. Now, despite the fact that I really do enjoy this book and I think it's great, there's something that's bothered me both times that I read it, and that is that in the French version there is a problematic use of the N-word. Obviously it has a historical context and it was written a while ago, and the word is not used the same way in English as it is in French, but it's still problematic, and that's bothered me both times I read it, and I was really taken aback. I just want to mention it because I think it's important to mention it, but obviously I have to look at it as a product of its time, but that doesn't mean that I can excuse that, so I wanted to mention that. And then finally, I finished off the month with Department of Speculation by Jenny Offel, which was also on my 2026 list. And I got the recommendation from Paul Mescal on the Inklings Book Club interview with Jack Edwards. I'm so happy that Paul, I'm going to call him Paul, we know each other, but I'm so happy that he recommended this because I would not have read it otherwise. And it's an amazing book. I loved the way that it was formatted, and it really reminded me of one of my favorite books of all time. It's a French book called La prochaine fois que tu mordras la poussière, where it almost feels like you're reading someone's iPhone notes. And by that I mean that it's very reflective, very personal, but it's still beautiful and there's still a story going on, but it's just so well written. I completely understand why Paul Mescal has reread it multiple times, and it's a book that I will definitely be returning to just from how enjoyable I found the writing and from how it was written. There's a quote on the back by Maggie O'Farrell that talks about how it's really hard to reinvent the novel as a form, but how this one does that, and I think that's exactly what it is. It's impressive because it feels like you're not reading a novel, but you are, and at the same time there is completely a narrative, but it's not fed to you outright. You're not mentioned the names of these characters. I really like books that go beyond the conventional aspects of novels and stories, and I'm so glad that I read it. I think I read it at a time where I really wanted to read it. Yeah, it was just a book that I really loved, and I think the more that I will go and return to it, the more that I will enjoy it, because it's one of those books that is obviously really enjoyable to read as a first time read, but I think it is one that just returning to constantly makes it even better. If you are going to pick one of the books that I talked about, let it be this one. I do understand why people don't love this book, but this book is exactly for people like me. That was Department of Speculation. I really loved it, and those were the 6 books that I read in January. I'm excited to read more in February. It is Black History Month, so I am trying to focus on Black authors this month as a whole, not exclusively, because I have a few other books that I also would like to get to this month, namely Wuthering Heights. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I'll see you very soon in my next one. Bye.